What's up, Falcons Nation? It's your boy Jew coming at you with another Atlanta Falcons video. As always, Falcons Nation, rise up. In today's video, I would like to talk about the Atlanta Falcons 53-man roster for the 2020 season. But if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell so you'll know when I've done Atlanta Falcons content. Hit that like button for your boy. I appreciate you guys continuing to tune in to the channel. But with that being said, let's jump right into the video. So as I was stating, the NFL, all the NFL teams today had to cut down to the final 53-man roster by 4 p.m. Eastern time today. And our Atlanta Falcons did cut down to that final 53-man roster for the 2020 season. I wasn't too surprised by the players that made the team. Personally, just looking at the roster, I believe that Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff went with guys that they could trust, guys that have been in the system, guys who have been developing in the system. And of course, we've kept our core unit together as far as the starters that's been on the team for the past couple seasons. I do feel like some of the cuts that took place were based off of no preseason games. I really feel like some players didn't have a chance to kind of prove themselves. Like a Laquan Treadwell, I feel like he was one of those players that we didn't have enough game film on. We didn't have no Falcons game film on him because we didn't have no preseason games, and then he doesn't have a ton of tape from when he played in Minnesota because he wasn't getting a ton of snaps. So I really think that a couple players were kind of hurt by the COVID-19 and the pandemic that's going on, where we didn't have those preseason games, and all they could really do was get those practice reps and those scrimmage reps. So I do think that was one of the main reasons why the Atlanta Falcons stuck with players that have been on the team, and they kind of, they already have game film on those guys. But with that being said, we're going to talk about the different players that made the team. First, we're going to start with the offense. Of course, Matt Ryan and Matt Schaub is his backup. Kurt Benkirk was actually cut from the team. From what I've been hearing, Kurt Benkirk and what I've seen out of Kurt Benkirk, I heard that he had a pretty good camp. But the Falcons only wanted to carry two quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. So Kurt Benkirk was cut. I do think that he is a player that could possibly come back on the practice squad. And he showed a lot of promise the last couple seasons. So I definitely like Kurt Benkirk a lot. If you remember last season, he performed well during preseason before injuring his toe. And he pretty much was out for the rest of the season when he injured his foot during preseason. But he had a good preseason showing, and he had a good camp 2 years in a row. So I definitely think that he's one of those players that definitely could come back on the practice squad. But no surprises there with Matt Ryan and Matt Schaub. Those are two guys that are veteran guys. They know the system, two wily vets. So I wasn't surprised by, them keeping Matt Ryan and them keeping Matt Schaub as the backup. As far as the running backs, of course, we had Todd Gurley, Brian Hill, Ito Smith, Quadri Olesen, and then Keith Smith as the fullback. No surprises there as well. Pretty much we brought back every single player or every single running back that was on the squad last year. Of course, we signed Todd Gurley in the offseason to be the starting running back for our team, but we kept all of the young running backs that we have behind Todd Gurley as well. And as you know, we signed Keith Smith, the fullback, to an extension this past offseason. So no surprises there as well. I did think that we were going to keep all of those guys, all of those young guys, Ito Smith, Brian Hill, and Quadri Olesen. All of those guys has continued to get better year after year, and they're still developing. So I think that was the right move to keep all of those guys and allow those guys to continue to grow. I do think that some of those guys like Quadri Olesen could possibly play some special teams as well, because he's probably not going to get a ton of snaps on offense, but I do think that they kept those guys on the roster to continue to develop. Now on the wide receiver side of things, of course, we brought back Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, Alameda Zaccheaus, Christian Blake, and Brandon Powell. Laquan Treadwell was the guy that was like the odd man out, and he ended up getting cut. We picked him up in the offseason from Minnesota in free agency. And I just think the biggest thing with Laquan Treadwell was we had no tape on him. Because there was no preseason, I really think that was a detriment to him. And I really believe that the final wide receiver cuts came down to, Christian Blake, Brandon Powell, or Laquan Treadwell. And I really think that Laquan Treadwell was cut because if you remember last year, all of those guys that I mentioned, Christian Blake, he actually got played during some games last year when Julio Jones missed that game against the Saints on Thanksgiving. Christian Blake got a ton of snaps in that game. Brandon Powell was actually on our practice squad towards the end of the season last year. So I really think that Laquan Treadwell was just the odd man out. I don't think that he had a bad camp or anything like that. I just feel like they felt like they couldn't really trust him. And Dan Quinn went with the guys. Him and Thomas Dimitroff went with the guys that they've seen, in practice, but also have seen in live games. So I really think that Laquan Treadwell being cut was mainly because there was no preseason games and we couldn't get no tape on him to actually see him in a live game and see what he could do. But as far as the other guys that made it, Olamide Zaccheaus had a great camp. I seen a lot of clips of him catching passes, whether it was a screen, whether it was him catching 9 routes, like deep patterns, using his speed. He also was fielding punts. Him and Brandon Powell. I really think that Brandon Powell was kept on the roster to be a return man, either in the a punt returner or a kickoff returner. Him and Ito Smith. So, and even Olamide Zaccheaus, I think he's another guy that could be used, to field punts and to actually do kickoff return. Another guy that everybody was harping over was Chris Rowland. He was a guy that some thought might make the roster. I did think he was on the bubble, and I thought he may make the roster as a return man, but they end up going with Brandon Powell over him. And I really think the issue there was, again, Brandon Powell was on a practice squad last year. He's been in the system developing. He knows what to expect. I mean, the team knows what to expect from him. Dan Quinn and those guys have seen him in practice, all last season. They have tape on him. He didn't play any live games, I don't believe, last season, but he's just a guy that they are familiar with. Chris Rowland was one of those guys we signed as an undrafted free agent, rookie. And I think the kid has a lot of talent. He's another guy that could possibly make the practice squad this season for us, and maybe we can groom him kind of like they did Brandon Powell last season. But it was pretty much no surprises there on the offensive side of things. I think that Julio Jones, of course, will be the 1. Calvin Ridley will be the 2 at wide receiver, and then Russell Gage will be that starting slot position. Of course, we've been hearing rumors about Mohamed Sanu because he has been cut from the Patriots. I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons, brought him in for a workout or possibly brought him back to the team. He could definitely be that 4th string wide receiver or that big body wide receiver on third downs that could help move the chains. But I really think that Russell Gage turned the corner last year once we traded Mohamed Sanu to the Patriots. And I think he showed a lot of promise. So I don't think that we necessarily need Mohamed Sanu, but I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him in at the right price. But like I said, it was not too many surprises there on the wide receiver end, other than Laquan Treadwell. To me, he was the only guy that was kind of like on the bubble that I thought that could possibly make the roster if he showed out at camp. But it looks like Dan Quinn and those guys just didn't trust it, and they went with the guys like Christian Blake and the guys that's been here, that's been in their system for the last 2 to 3 years, been developing. So I definitely agree with, them going with the players they know. They just didn't want to take any risk. And to me, I kind of agree with that. You have those guys like Christian Blake and Russell Gage. You've been developing those guys. Matt Ryan is comfortable throwing passes to those guys and things of that nature. So I just think that all the way around, Laquan Treadwell was just an odd man out. Now for the tight ends, Hayden Hurst was kept on the roster. Jaden Graham and Luke Stalker. Pretty much all of those guys, except for Hayden Hurst, who was brought in or traded for during the offseason to be the starting tight end. Jaden Graham and Luke Stalker, both of those guys were on the roster last year. Of course, we had Austin Hooper that signed with the Cleveland Browns in the offseason. So no surprise there either. I think all three of those guys are solid tight ends. I think Hayden Hurst is more explosive than like a Hooper or Austin Hooper. I think he's going to be a lot better run after catch than Austin Hooper was. He's very physical. I think he's a better blocker than Austin Hooper. And I know he's more explosive. Just based off of his speed, he's way more explosive than an Austin Hooper. Jaden Graham, he looked pretty good last year as well. When Hooper missed those couple games with injury, he did have a touchdown in that game against the Saints on Thanksgiving night. Jaden Graham, he's another one of those guys that's pretty explosive. I think he played at BYU in college, but he's one of those guys that's physical as well, is a decent blocker. And then, of course, Luke Stalker was brought back to the team, re-signed a one-year deal with the team. He's another guy, a long-time Tennessee Titan player. He didn't play well last season, but I think that Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff and Rick McKay brought him back to mainly be a blocker for whether he's back in the backfield, kind of like a H-back to block for the running backs, or whether he's up front, on the offensive line, on the end of the line blocking. He's a pretty solid blocker. He didn't play, like I said, he didn't play well at all last season. He did play very good in Tennessee when he was with the Titans. So hopefully with him, him being in his second year under Dirk Cutter's system, he can turn the corner a little bit. I'm not expecting too much out of Luke Stalker this year. I think that Hayden Hurst and Jaden Graham is really our horses on the tight end spectrum of things. I think those are the guys that are going to get majority of the snaps unless we go 3 tight end set and just try to do like a jumbo package to try to run the football. I really don't see them, giving Luke Stalker too many snaps on offense. Now, with that being said, for the offensive line, you had, of course, Alex Mack, Matt Hennessy, Jake Matthews. McCray was another one of those guys that was kept on the squad. Matt Gono was kept on the squad. Caleb McGarry also kept on the squad. And I got to look at my list here, y'all. John Wetzel was one of those guys that was kept on the squad. And James Carpenter. I think I named all of the players. Justin McCray. So that was pretty much all of the guys that, from the offensive line standpoint, that made it. I wasn't surprised pretty much by anyone that made it on the offensive line as well. Pretty much everybody I expected to make the roster made the roster. One player that I thought that could have been on the bubble was a guy like McCray, Justin McCray, which I heard that he's been playing the backup center role for Alex Mack. During camp, he was playing a little bit of the backup center and guard position. John Wetzel, he was a guy that I thought possibly would be cut, but you always have to have depth. So I really think that the Falcons did a good job. Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff did a good job on both the defensive line and offensive line of keeping depth. They kept about 7 or 8 players on the offensive line, which is always a great thing because you never know if someone's going to go down with injury. And I would rather have an offensive lineman that's been in practices and not bringing somebody off the street if someone gets injured. You do want somebody that's in there that knows the cadences, that has been practicing with the squad and gelling with the other guys. Offensive line is one of those positions where you definitely all have to be on one accord, especially because we run a lot of that outside zone and stuff like that, where guys are stepping to the right or to the left, and they have to move in concert and work together. So I definitely think that the offensive line is going to be solid this year, and I really wasn't surprised by anybody other than, like I said, Justin McCray. He was one of the guys that was on the bubble, and John Wetzel. Those 2 guys I kind of had on the bubble, but everybody else that made the squad, I pretty much figured they would make the squad. So let's jump over to the defensive side because that's pretty much it for the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side, we're going to start with the defensive line. So you had John Kaminsky make the squad, Dante Fowler Jr., Marlon Davidson made the squad, Jacob Tutui Mariner made the squad, Charles Harris made the squad, Alan Bailey made the squad, Deidre Sanat made the squad, Tyler Davidson, Grady Jarrett, Tack McKinley, and Stephen Means. So you see, we kept, I believe, like 11 defensive linemen. I'm loving the move by Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn with that, of keeping that depth up front. I really feel like the last couple seasons we haven't had enough depth on the defensive line. But I love what we did this year and bringing in those guys like Charles Harris, bringing in Dante Fowler Jr. To be that premier pass rusher, to take the role of Vic Beasley. Jacob Tutui Mariner is one of those guys that I think is going to be used in base packages. He showed promise a little bit towards the end of the season at the defensive end position. They kind of play him at the defensive end in the base package, and he did a pretty good job of setting the edge. Alan Bailey, another guy that was here last season that we brought over from Kansas City. He's another guy that's physical in the trenches. You can use him inside or outside. He's very versatile as well. One of those guys mainly used for stopping the run. Those two guys, Jacob Tutui Mariner, Alan Bailey, those are guys that I kind of had on the bubble. Another guy, Charles Harris, was another guy that I was wondering, would he be, will we keep him or would he be let go? Because I haven't heard a ton out of Charles Harris since he's been at camp. I haven't really heard negative or positive things about him. So we'll see, where the cards may fall where they may. We'll see how good he is during the games if he actually gets in the rotation. But for the most part, as I've been stating this whole video, most of the guys that made the squad on the defensive line, I pretty much figured would make the roster. It wasn't too many surprises there. I'm expecting a big year out of Tack McKinley, Grady Jarrett, Dante Fowler, and those guys. I'm expecting those guys to shine for this defensive line. John Kaminsky is a guy that Grady Jarrett has been raving about how well how much he's improved and how well he's been doing at practice. Grady Jarrett has been talking about how well and the leap that he's seen John Kaminsky make since last season. John Kaminsky also mentioned in his media session this past week that he feels a lot more comfortable because he's no longer a rookie. He feels a lot more comfortable in his role on the team. So I'm expecting big things out of him as well. Stephen Means is a guy that is actually on the COVID list, so he didn't count against the 53-man roster, but he's still on the squad. He can be brought back once he's off of the COVID, off the COVID list, on the COVID-19 list. But he's another guy that I think can get you a couple sacks a year, maybe 4 or 5 sacks, a year. But let's jump over to the linebackers. So for the linebackers, we had Michael Walker, the rookie, make the squad. Deion Jones, Leroy Reynolds, Afoye Aluakon, and Dayon Buchanan. I really wasn't surprised there either. The only player that I thought was on the bubble was Leroy Reynolds. All the other guys, I pretty much figured that they would make the squad because we're not that deep at the linebacker position. After Deion Jones and Afoye Aluakon, we're not that deep. That's the reason that we brought in Dayon Buchanan, because he can play that Swiss Army knife role. He can either be a linebacker or a safety. So the kid Michael Walker, I think the young kid, we drafted him this year out of Fresno State. I've heard that he's been showing promise at camp. He was one of those guys that was standing out at camp. He was one of the standouts that everybody was raving about as well. This how well he was picking up the scheme, how fast he was picking up things. And I really think that Afoye Aluakon better go out there and perform well, because I really could see Michael Walker overtaking that position eventually if Afoye Aluakon doesn't start off the season and doesn't play well, throughout the season. I definitely think that Michael Walker is athletic enough to be one of those guys that can cover tight ends out of the backfield and cover running backs. And he's also physical enough because at Fresno State, he played a lot of defensive end or playing up on the line. So he's definitely one of those linebackers that can shed blocks, and he can come downhill and be a thumper. So I definitely love the young kid, Michael Walker. I really think that Leroy Reynolds was kept on the roster mainly for special teams and as a savvy veteran. He was with our team in 2016 when we went to the Super Bowl. 2016 and 2017, I believe he was on our team. He was one of those guys that's used in special teams. He's a very good tackler in open space. And he's one of those guys that can run sideline to sideline. But he's very good on special teams and one of those veteran guys in the locker room that you can count on to be one of those guys to bring his lunch pail. He's one of those blue collar players. So I definitely like the, us keeping Leroy Reynolds as well. One of those guys you can count on in the special team side of things. Deion Jones is Deion Jones. We all know that Deion Jones is a baller. It was no surprise there. And then Deone Bucannon, like I said, he's one of those guys that's a Swiss Army knife type guy. He played with Arizona for a very long time. He's another guy that if someone goes down with injury like a Foye Oluokun or even a Deion Jones, he knows how to play that Mike linebacker position. Because when he was in Arizona, he was playing that Mike linebacker position where he had the mic in his helmet and he was the one being the signal caller for the Cardinals when he was there. So he's a very smart player, very savvy player, and a very physical player. He's another guy that's a thumper, that's not afraid to come downhill, even though he's not the biggest guy. He's one of the stronger, smaller linebackers in the league. He was converted when he was in college. He was actually a safety, but he was converted down to a linebacker in Arizona because he was so physical. They did give him a chance, and he ended up proving, I believe in one season, he had almost 100 tackles when he was in Arizona. In a couple seasons, he had like over 80 tackles. So he's one of those guys that's a tackling machine and also very savvy and good at blitzing and decent in coverage as well. So I'm expecting big things out of Deone Bucannon in that linebacker group. We do have some youth on that group with Michael Walker, but I think Deion Jones and those guys will help bring him along. Him and Leroy Reynolds, guys that's been around the league, they'll help him learn how to, view film and teach him how to be a pro, be a professional. So I like the linebacker group. Now with our DBs, we kept Kendall Sheffield, Isaiah Oliver, AJ Terrell, Darqueze Dennard, Bleedy Way Wilson, and Jordan Miller. No surprises there either. I figured, AJ Terrell probably will be the starter on the outside, him and Kendall Sheffield, or him and Isaiah Oliver. They possibly would be the two guys on the outside. I'm not too sure how healthy Kendall Sheffield is because Kendall Sheffield was hurt a big portion of training camp. So that could possibly prevent him from starting. But personally, I think that he eventually will end up being the starter. If not, they possibly will start AJ Terrell and Isaiah Oliver on the outside and then allow Darqueze Dennard to be that slot guy like he was in Cincinnati. I do think that bringing Darqueze Dennard in was a big move for our Falcons because he's one of those savvy veterans that can play multiple cornerback positions. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's one of those guys that's physical as well. He tackles well for a DB. And he's a guy that was been showing out in camp. I seen him have a nice pick, interception or pick during the one-on-one drills between the wide receivers and DBs. Darqueze Dennard actually picked off Matt Ryan during one of those drills during the one-on-one sessions. I just think that he's one of those guys that's very savvy. He's been around the league. And sometimes, like I said, you need those veteran guys that's been around. So I think we got a good mix of young and old on our in our secondary. I'm expecting big things out of AJ Terrell. He's a ball hawk. I definitely think that he's going to be a starter from day one on the outside and be one of those guys that could either follow the number one receiver of the other team or just play one side of the field, kind of like Richard Sherman did in Seattle. But I really think that he's one of those guys that's going to be like a Richard Sherman. When Richard Sherman was in his prime, I do think that AJ Terrell is going to be that good. I do think he's going to be a special corner for us. Isaiah Oliver, I've been hearing that he's been improving, showing improvement in camp. Last year, his biggest thing was he didn't know how to turn around for the football, and he didn't know how to, he lost a lot of his confidence because he didn't know how to high point the football. He didn't know how to turn his head around. He would just face guard receivers a lot. So I hope that he learned from last year. From what the clips I've seen of Isaiah Oliver in camp, he looks pretty good. He's been batting down passes. I haven't seen him get any interceptions since camp started, but I definitely seen him have a couple pass breakups, which is good news. Bleedy Wade Wilson is a savvy veteran guy that I knew we would bring back because he played great down the stretch of the season. The game that stood out to me the most was him against us against the 49ers when Bleedy Wade basically got his hands on two footballs, could possibly have been interceptions, but he did an excellent job. He plays he's a very sound, fundamental player, has great technique for a cornerback, and he's one of those guys in the defensive backs room that can help bring these young guys along, like an AJ Terrell, like an Isaiah Oliver, and also like a Jordan Miller. Jordan Miller was one of those guys that I had on the bubble as well, but he was actually brought back as well, even though he doesn't count against the 53-man roster right now because he's suspended for 4 games for substance abuse, or for PEDs. So hopefully he can finally get on the field at some point this season so we can actually see what he has. But for the most part, like I was stating, I think we did a good job of building a solid secondary. A good mix of older players and young players. Now for our safeties, of course, we still have DeMonte Casey, who's a ball hawk. We kept the young kid, Jalen Hawkins, out of the University of Cal. We kept Ricardo Allen, of course, Sherrod Niesman, and Keanu Neal. So pretty much we kept like five safeties. And I think that's another position that you need to have depth at because we've had so many injuries down the last couple seasons that I think we really needed that insurance policy just in case Keanu Neal or Ricardo Allen go down with injuries. Knock on wood. You can have the young gun, Jalen Hawkins, come in the game. He's one of those guys that's kind of like Keanu Neal, a very physical dude. And very fast dude. He's a guy that can also make plays on the football. If you go watch Jalen Hawkins' college tape, he was one of those guys that was making some ridiculous interceptions. He had a one-handed interception, like an Odell Beckham type catch. And he's one of those guys also that'll come up and hit you. He is one of those bigger style safeties, like over 6 feet. I think he's like 6'2", and he's one of those guys that's a thumper, and definitely can come downhill and make plays. So, of course, DeMonte Casey speaks for itself. His best skill is being a ball hawk and following his instincts. When we play that single high safety look, he's back there like the outfielder most of the time, and he does an excellent job. He has excellent range. Keanu Neal is Keanu Neal. We all know Keanu Neal is one of the most physical safeties in the game, one of the most physical players in the game. He does bring that intimidation factor to our Atlanta Falcons, so I definitely hope he stays fully healthy this season, so he can get back to being his Pro Bowl form. Ricardo Allen is like the brains of the defense. I love Ricardo Allen. To me, he's one of the most underrated safeties in the game. But he's one of those guys that can play pretty much any position in the secondary. He can play the cornerback position, he can play the safety position, and he can come down and be like a box linebacker or a box safety. So even though he's not the biggest guy, Ricardo Allen is a very sound tackler, very physical for his size. And, he's definitely one of those guys that makes plays on the defensive side of the ball. Now, as far as the special teams go, of course, as our kicker, we kept Younghoe Koo. He did an excellent job when he came in last year after we cut Matt Bryant and we brung Younghoe Koo in. He played excellent down the stretch. He didn't miss many field goals. And he's one of those guys that I think the Falcons can continue to develop. Now, the long snapper has been Josh Harris for like the last 5 or 6 seasons. So it's good to have him back over on the special teams. And then we also got a new punter, Sterling Hofrichter is his name. And he's a guy out of the University of Syracuse that we drafted with our last pick. And from what I hear, he's booming kicks. He's doing a good job of getting a lot of hang time on his kicks. And he's one of those guys that have a very strong leg. So I definitely think that the secondary is going to be much improved again this season, especially on kickoff returns and punt returns. I do think that our team is a lot faster than we were last year. So I'm expecting big things from our squad. But this has been your boy Jew. You guys let me know, what you think in the comments about the 53-man roster. Do you like the players that were kept on the roster? Personally, I like the roster. Personally, I think they did a good job of bringing back the main core unit, and the players that they sprinkled in, I think, are going to be impact players. Like Dante Fowler, I definitely think he's going to be a playmaker. Keanu Neal coming back from injury is definitely a game changer because of his physicality and the intimidation factor of him being across the middle. So, like I was saying, you guys just let me know what you think in the video. Let me know if it was a player that you thought we should have maybe kept that we let go. Definitely leave those comments. Definitely hit that subscribe button for your boy. I appreciate you guys continuing to tune into the channel. Let's get ready for week 1. It's basically, as of tomorrow, a week away from Atlanta Falcons hosting the Seattle Seahawks. I'll have some big things coming for you guys this upcoming week about my keys to victory against Seattle. But football is upon us. I'm going to be also doing some live videos. So I got some new things coming for you guys. You guys, like I said, continue to tune in. But with that being said, this has been your boy Jew. I'll holler at y'all in the next video. And as always, Falcons Nation, rise up. Peace and love. I'm out. Deuces.